Sometimes all you have to do is just add potatoes to beef for a delicious, easy meal. I'm going to show you 5 ways to make beef and potatoes. Today, I'm going to show you a quick and easy recipe for carne con papas. This is going to be good. Here I have my ingredients. I'm working with a pound of lean ground beef. I'm also working with about 5 small potatoes. Here I have some beef bouillon powder I'll be adding into the mix. I have half of a small onion diced, 2 cloves of garlic minced, an 8-ounce can of tomato sauce. Here I will be using whole cumin seeds and black peppercorns that I just kind of crushed up. I'll also be adding some water into the mix, so let's get started. Here in a preheated pan, I'm going to add some cooking oil, maybe 1 or 2 tablespoons works for this. I am working with lean ground beef. I'm going to saute my onions first, and I'm working with like a medium heat. And I'm just going to saute the onions until they become aromatic and translucent. To the onions, I'm going to add a pinch of salt and continue the saute. Now I'm going to add my pound of lean ground beef, and it's going to go right into the pan. And I'm going to break this apart and start to season it. So I'm going to add a half teaspoon or so of salt to start with. Here I have some onion powder, like a teaspoon of granulated garlic powder is going to go in. I'm also adding my fresh garlic. Now I'm adding a teaspoon of that black peppercorn cumin seed mix that I kind of crushed and grinded up. I'm also going to add like a teaspoon and a half of beef bouillon powder. And I'm just going to continue to combine and cook the ground beef. For the potatoes, I'm using gold potatoes, and I cut them into slices and then I cut them in half. Some of the larger pieces I cut in half. Here I just started cutting them into chunks. I was kind of all over the place. I'm adding that into the pan, and I'm going to saute the potatoes along with the cooked ground beef. This is going to take some time, maybe 5 to 7 minutes over a medium to medium high heat to saute the potatoes. I'm going to add a little bit of salt, maybe like a half teaspoon of salt, to sort of season or salt the potatoes, and just continue the saute. The reason why I call this easy carne con papas is because I'm using ground beef. Typically, I do like to use a cheap cut of steak or a stew meat, but this is what I'm working with today. So I'm going to add just a little bit of fresh cilantro. That's optional for those that don't like it. And now I'm going to add that 8 ounces of tomato sauce. Now, when my family makes this, or my grandmother or my mom, they actually like to blend up tomatoes, like whole Roma tomatoes with garlic into the mix, but I'm working with a canned tomato sauce. So I'm going to add a little water into the can of tomato sauce to get some residual sauce out of there. And actually, I should have just filled it up. So I'm going to add in all a cup of water into this pan because I want this to simmer and cook the potatoes through. So I'm going to give this a really good mix. I'm going to cover with a lid and let it simmer for about 10 to 12 minutes or until your potatoes are cooked through. By the way, I'm going to be serving this with a Mexican style white rice with vegetables. I will be posting the recipe video for this soon enough, but this goes perfect with my carne con papas. It's so good. Okay, so at this point, my carne con papas should be done. And I'm just going to lift the lid, give it a stir. You'll always want to taste things for seasoning and salt and adjust to your preference. Sometimes I like to toss bay leaf in there. Sometimes I like to add Mexican oregano. It really just depends on what aromatics and flavors you prefer. So this is done and I'm ready to serve it. So to serve this, I'm going to just add scoops of my Mexican style white rice with veggies right onto a plate. And then I'm just going to add my carne con papas, or my ground beef and potatoes, right on top. This goes great with flour or corn tortillas. It really is up to you. This is a comforting dish in my opinion, and it's so easy to make. So I hope you give this recipe a try. I hope you like it. Let's make carne guisada tacos. Now I'm going to call this easy. I am making the carne guisada on the stovetop, but the easy part comes from the flour tortillas that I purchased from the store bakery. I will show you how to make soft flour tortillas from scratch, should you want to go ahead and do that. Either way, it's going to be good. Okay, to get started with this carne guisada, I'm working with 2.5 pounds of beef chuck roast. I'm going to cut this up into like maybe 1/2-inch pieces or small cubes. Instead of going with beef bouillon powder, I'm going to use beef stock and salt into the mix or into the pot to season this. I'm also going to be adding some whole cumin seeds and black peppercorn, and I'm going to crush those up. I'll be using maybe 1 or 2 teaspoons of that. Here's some all-purpose flour. This is going to help to create that carne guisada gravy, to create that roux. And I'm working with 1 small onion, 3 Roma tomatoes, garlic, maybe 3 or 4 cloves, and I had 3 potatoes left in my potato bucket. So I am going to add that to the pot. This is optional because I like to make carne guisada without potatoes most of the time, but I want to make these tacos hearty, so potatoes are going in. And let's get started. I'm going to prep all the ingredients, chop everything up, and going to start browning the meat. So I have all of my beef cut into chunks. What I'm going to do now is add, just make sure you coat the bottom with cooking oil and get that preheated very well because we're going to brown the meat. I'm going to add a little bit of salt, just do that. And then when I add it to the pan, I'll add a little bit more. Maybe start with like a 1/2 teaspoon of fine salt. Okay, now add the meat. I'm going to get a little bit more salt and do the other side. And I'm going to let this brown well. It's going to take time. There we go. And I'm just going to let that go for a couple of minutes. Then I'm going to start mixing it around. I'm going to turn up the heat just to the highest setting. I really want this to saute well. Okay. I'm going to work with about 1.5 teaspoons of this crushed black peppercorn and whole cumin seed mix. Going to shake in my ground cumin and black peppercorn mix. Give that a saute here. Now, let's add the onions right in the center. And continue to saute and brown the meat and the onion together. Now for the tomato. And keep on going until everything is browned and sauteed. Okay, let's go in with the garlic. And this is what you're looking for. The onions have browned, caramelized, and sauteed. The tomatoes are breaking down. Things are getting browned and cooked in this pot. It already smells amazing. For the potatoes, I'm going to add those in. And I'm going to add another pinch of salt. And when I say pinch, I'm going in with like 1/4 teaspoon of salt onto the potato. And I'm going to continue to brown and saute everything for another 5 minutes. Here I have all-purpose flour, and I'm just going to start shaking in flour to create a roux. 2, 3, 6. I think I'll go with 8 tablespoons. I think it's going to be, I really want the gravy to, be on the thicker side. And now I'm just going to mix and keep browning until you get a beautiful crust at the bottom of your pot. You can see that's already happening. That fond is going to be great. Okay, so I'm working with 32 ounces of beef stock going in. Oh, it smells so good. Now I'm going to start picking up that fond from the bottom of the pan. You want to make sure you scrape it. It smells wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to go in with 1 extra cup of liquid in the form of water. I'm adding a cup of water. You could add more beef broth or stock and give that a mix. I'm going to cover with the lid. And I am going to lower the heat, and I want this to simmer for about 1.5 hours. And it should be done. If not, you might need to add a little extra liquid and let it continue simmering until you get tender chunks of beef. Okay, so it's 30 minutes in to the simmer time, and I'm going to give it a stir. You can kind of lift the lid and stir it throughout the cooking process just to make sure nothing burns or gets stuck to the bottom. Oh, it smells fantastic already. Oh yeah, see it kind of, whoops. You want to give things a stir because there's flour in the mix, so it does get kind of, sometimes it'll get spots where it sort of gets stuck. And the starchiness from the potato also adds to, to that. Okay, so that wasn't too bad. Oh, it smells so good. Okay, going back on with the lid. And you can adjust the heat a little bit. If it's simmering too much, just kind of lower the heat and let it keep going. Okay, so it has been 1 hour of cook time. At this point, you'll want to taste it for salt and seasoning and adjust to your preference. I'm going to give that a mix. I already tasted this for salt and seasoning, so I did add more salt. And I'm going to crank up the heat a little bit because now I really want some of the liquid in this to reduce just a little bit. I'm going to let this go for another 20 minutes uncovered. But for the most part, the meat is tender. I just want to thicken the sauce a little bit more and reduce. So, like a medium heat. And let that keep going for another 15-20 minutes. And then it should be done. Okay, so these are the store-bought flour tortillas that I like to buy at my local grocery store in the bakery section. But let me show you how to make them from scratch. Here I have around 3 cups of all-purpose flour. It's, to be exact, 400 grams. To that, I'm going to add a teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of baking powder. Mix that. Now I'm going to add a 1/3 cup of butter. You could add a 1/3 cup of shortening, a 1/3 cup of lard. If you prefer to use oil, add a 1/4 cup or 4 tablespoons of cooking oil. That also works. I like to use bacon grease sometimes. So once this is mixed, I'm going to be using hot water. As hot as your hands can take it. Okay. This is 1 cup. Start with like 3/4 of a cup and start mixing it carefully. You can even start with like, you know, a wooden spoon or something that doesn't. Okay. Now I'm going to combine, mix everything together. Keep it in the bowl for now. Okay, I'm going to start kneading this on my work surface. Grab some flour. Flour your work surface. The dough is sticky and tacky. Now, if you find that the dough is dry, then don't flour your work surface. You might need to add more water. But I'm going to knead this for about 5 to 10 minutes until a smooth dough ball forms. Now I'm just going to separate them into at least 12. I'm going to go for 14 to 15 dough balls. Now that the dough balls are separated, I am going to place it back into the bowl. And just kind of shape the dough balls and repeat the process. Here I have a damp cloth, and I'm just going to place it over all of my dough balls and rest the dough for at least 15 minutes. I'm going to lightly sprinkle my work surface. Now it's time to roll these out. I'm going to take one and bring it over to my flour. Use your rolling pin and let's roll it out. You want to be careful not to use too much flour because it will work back into the dough. If it shrinks back too much when you're rolling it out, you need to rest the dough longer. Okay, so now I'm going to take this over to the bowl and hang it over the edge and repeat the process for about 4 of them before I start to cook them. I have my preheated griddle and I'm going to cook the tortilla. It should bubble up within the first 10 seconds of placing it on your griddle. If it doesn't, it needs to be hotter. Okay, I'm going to place it in my basket here carefully, and I'm going to wrap it and just repeat the process for the other tortillas. Okay, so now that your tortillas are done, time to make a very simple taco. Really all it is your favorite tortilla, and you add your carne guisada right to it. Top with your favorite salsa, and you got a good meal. And it's the perfect day to make a perfect beef stew. This is going to be good. To start, I'm working with 3.5 pounds of boneless beef chuck roast that I'm cutting into like 1 to 1.5 inch pieces. And I've preheated a pot. And I'm also going to be using some salt and pepper to add to my beef because I'm going to brown it very well. A lot of chefs, or it is advised to salt and season your meat while on the cutting board. I'm kind of doing it in the bowl. Okay, so my pot is preheated. I'm going to add several tablespoons of cooking oil. And now what I'm going to do is just create a single layer with space in between the pieces because this is going to give the best browning to the meat. If you crowd the pan or the pot, then it's just going to sort of turn gray, release its natural juices, and kind of boil. But you really want to get a good brown crust on the pieces. So take your time doing this. I'm going to do this like in 3 or 4 batches. So I already salted and peppered one side of the meat, so I'm just going to go over with a little more salt and some cracked black pepper. Be sure to check the description below for the ingredient list and measurements. Okay, so I'm going to be placing all of my browned meat on a baking sheet. You could do this in another bowl. And I want you to see, this is what you're looking for. This deep golden brown crust on the exterior of the meat. This is browning the meat, and this is going to give you color and flavor to the beef stew. I'm going to be working with 1 large onion, 5 cloves of fresh garlic, and 1 celery stick. I'm just going to prep and chop that while I'm browning the meat. And this is what you end up with. And like I said, this was the first batch, and look at the beautiful deep brown coloring on the beef. And it also renders its own fat and juices, and then kind of caramelizes and sticks to the bottom of the pan. You want that. That's the fond. So a little more cooking oil, and I'm just going to repeat the process. Like I said, take your time. This is not a quick process, but the little extra work you take to brown your meat will yield beautiful color and flavor to this beef stew. So I'm going to turn the pot down because I'm done browning the meat. And this is what it looks like. It smells amazing, and all I added was salt and pepper to the beef. Okay, so I've chopped my onion and celery going into the pot. I'm going to add just a little pinch of this flaky sea salt that I'm working with. Add it to the onions and celery and saute well until everything becomes aromatic and translucent. And once that happens, it's going to take a little time. I'm going to add my roughly chopped garlic, my 5 cloves of garlic. And the pot is just doing wonderous things. Okay, quick saute to the garlic, and I am going to add just a little more of my cooking oil. I'm actually working with avocado oil. You could do olive oil if you want, or veg oil. Okay, saute, and now I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of tomato paste right into the pot. And I'm going to cook that quickly for like a minute, just to sort of intensify the flavor of that. And now all of the meat goes right back into the pot. And it did just sort of rest and have juices on the pan. You want to add that too. And now I'm going to shake in 6 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. This is going to help thicken the beef stew sauce as it cooks. So I'm going to coat everything, combine, and cook that flour for about a minute or so, maybe 2 minutes. Okay, now I'm going to add 1.5 cups of a dry red wine right into the pot, and that's going to start to deglaze all of that fond, so you'll want to work this into the meat and veggies and sort of scrape up that fond. And you'll see that it's going to start to simmer. The alcohol will cook out throughout the entire cooking process, and it'll start to thicken. At this point, I'm going to add 4 cups of beef broth. You could add 5 cups. I only had 4 cups, and so I'm going to just add an extra cup of water. In total, 6 cups of liquid. And if you don't have red wine to add, just add more beef broth. Now I'm going to add some fresh aromatics like rosemary and some sprigs of thyme. I also have 1 dried bay leaf, and you could use dried thyme and rosemary in place of the fresh. It all works. I would say if you're using dried thyme and rosemary, like a half teaspoon to a full teaspoon goes in there. Okay, so I'm just going to give this a little mix, submerge those aromatics, and bring it to a boil. By the way, I am working with a 6-quart Dutch oven, and here it's starting to boil, so I'm going to cover with a lid. And at this point, I don't need the stovetop. I'm shutting it off, and I'm going to place this in a preheated oven of 325 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to let this cook for the first half for about an hour and a half at 325 degrees Fahrenheit. And so here I have 1.5 pounds of russet potatoes that I'm going to peel and cut, and here I have 2 large carrots. So at the halfway point, because it takes about 3 hours in the oven at 325 degrees Fahrenheit, so I'm an hour and a half in, I'm going to remove the lid, and it smells amazing. This beef is not even tender, but I almost want to eat as is. Okay, give this a stir, and I'm actually going to start fishing out a lot of the stems and the bay leaf. I think they've done their job, so just kind of take that out. Okay, so at this point, you'll want to give this a taste. And if it needs a little extra salt, pepper, seasoning, add it. Salt and seasoning is to your preference, so I suggest you taste throughout and adjust. Okay, so I'm going to add my salt and pepper, and I'm just going to give that a little mix. And now I'm going to add my potatoes and carrots, and I cut them into large chunks. Now, if you're cutting them into like coin-sized carrots and small chunks of potatoes, maybe just add it in the last hour of cook time. Okay, so I'm going to give this a stir. I'm going to cover with a lid, and it goes right back into the oven to cook for another hour and a half. Like I stated earlier, the cook time is around 3 hours, or until everything is fork tender. So it has been another hour and a half, like I said, 3 hours total, and this is done. My husband's going to remove this. We are all so hungry, and you definitely can cook this on the stovetop. You'll just have to simmer at a constant, gentle simmer and make sure everything cooks through properly. Okay, so I can't tell you how I just want to dive into this, but I'm going to give this a stir. And I want you to see how tender everything is. I even actually left one potato whole. I don't even know why I did that. I didn't notice when I was filming, but it is cooked perfectly with the wooden spoon. Cuts right in half. It's so creamy and tender. This is one of the reasons why I love to use russet potatoes for beef stew. I love the creaminess and texture. And the sauce is just perfection. The meat is tender. I love it. Okay, so oven going on 450 degrees Fahrenheit because I am going to warm up and heat a baguette. And I like to just kind of wet my hands, they're clean, and just wet the exterior of the baguette and place it right onto the oven rack for about 5 minutes at 450 degrees or until the exterior is crusty and toasty. It's so good. I am going to garnish my beef stew with fresh chopped parsley. Sometimes I like to add peas into the mix. Sometimes I even like to add some fresh corn. I don't know. Make it hearty, make it yours. But this is so good. Okay, so my baguette is done, and check this out. Super toasty. And now I'm just going to serve a bowl with some of that baguette, and that is dinner. It's as simple as that. If you want a side salad, you could also serve this over rice. Sometimes my husband does that. It all works. It's so good. I hope you give this recipe a try. I hope you like it, and thanks for watching. Today I'm making a super easy ground beef and potato skillet recipe that you're going to keep in rotation all year long because it's so good and easy. Here we go. I am starting off with 1 pound of lean ground beef. I'm also going to be using around 1.5 pounds of russet potatoes. Here I have some bell peppers and onion that were in a frozen vegetable medley that I had in the freezer. The bag is empty, so I'm using the peppers and onions that kind of collected at the bottom. You could use fresh if that's what you have. I'm also using taco seasoning mix that I purchased from the grocery store. And now it's time to start cooking. So in a cast iron skillet, I'm going to add some cooking oil because I am working with lean ground beef. But first, I'm going to start by sauteing the peppers and onions and then the potatoes. For those of you that are new here, welcome to my channel, Simply Mama Cooks. Please check the description below for the ingredient list and the measurements. And for those of you that have been with me, have been subscribed, and watch my videos every time I post, I thank you. And guess what? February 14th on Valentine's Day was our 11th year anniversary. Look at us, going strong in a long-term relationship. And if you don't believe me, go to the About section on my YouTube channel. You'll see February 14th is when I started this channel. Okay, the potatoes are in, and I am going to sprinkle maybe like a 1/2 teaspoon of fine salt. And I'm just going to continue the saute for about 5 to 7 minutes. I want to saute the potatoes before I start to cook the ground beef because potatoes do take a while to cook, so that does help to keep the texture of the potatoes and it gives them a head start. So here I've created a space and I'm going to start to cook the ground beef on one side of the pan. This is a one skillet, one pan dinner and it's very easy. So I'm just going to start breaking apart the ground beef and you can season this however you like. I had a package of taco seasoning mix, but before I add that, I am going to add a little bit of granulated onion powder and granulated garlic powder. And even after this cooks, you'll always want to taste it for salt and seasoning and adjust to your preference. So here I'm going to add that taco seasoning mix, and it still has to cook through, but I'm going to work that in. If you do not have store-bought taco seasoning mix, just start with a tablespoon to 2 tablespoons of fancy light chili powder, maybe a half teaspoon of ground cumin, a teaspoon of garlic powder, onion powder, and I like to add a teaspoon of smoked paprika into the mix, and that kind of gives you a good base for a taco seasoning. Okay, so I'm just going to continue to cook this. Once the ground beef is cooked through, you'll want to start adding the potatoes with the beef, mixing it around, and continue sauteing. Now I'm going to add a 1.5 cups of water right into the pan. And you can cover this with a lid after combining everything. What I'm going to use is a splatter screen and that I just covered with aluminum foil to act as a lid. So I'm going to cook this covered for about 12 to 15 minutes. Lower the heat once you start to hear it simmer and let the potatoes cook through. In the meantime, I'm going to prep my toppings because I am making a ground beef and potato taco skillet bowl. And essentially, it's the ground beef and potatoes and you top it however you like. It's such an easy and hearty dinner that comes together quick. So this has been cooking covered for about 12 minutes and it smells amazing. It was so easy to put together, especially with ingredients that I always keep in my kitchen, pantry, and refrigerator, and even freezer. Just give everything a mix. At this point, you'll want to taste it for salt and seasoning, and like I always say, adjust to your preferences and tastes. Okay, so once the potato is tender, it's ready to serve. So if you are looking for an easy weeknight dinner using ground beef and potatoes, you got to try this. This is the next one that you'll want to try. Let me show you one of my family's favorite potato and ground beef recipes. I like to add creamy sauce on top with cheese, and it is the perfect weeknight casserole. It's so good. I'm starting off with 3 tablespoons of unsalted butter. I'm going to melt that down. And this is going to create a roux once I add my 1/4 cup or 4 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. I'm going to shake that into the pot with the melted butter. And I'm going to mix, stir, and cook this for about 1.5 to 2 minutes over a medium-low heat. I'm also going to add heavy cream. Typically, you'll want to add 2 cups of heavy cream into this. I only had 1.5 cups. I'm probably going to add something else to make up for that extra half cup, but you know, 2 cups of heavy cream goes into this. Give it a good mix, continually stir until it thickens. Here I'm going to add salt to taste, just a pinch. And when I say salt to taste, you'll want to taste your sauce and then adjust to your preference. So I added Salvadorian sour cream. And if you want to try it this way, go for it because it tastes so good. Okay, see how it's thickened? So I'm just gonna set this aside until I'm ready to use it. And the heat is already off. Here I have 90% lean ground beef to 10% fat. I'm going to be using 3 pounds of potatoes, 1 onion. Here I created taco seasoning blend. I'll put what I used in the description below, but honestly, just use an envelope or packet of taco seasoning mix from the store. It works. Okay, I'm also going to use 1.5 cups of beef broth. This is 1.5 cups of warm water, 1 tablespoon of Knorr beef bouillon powder. Here I have a cast iron skillet, a little bit of cooking oil because I'm working with lean ground beef, by the way. So I'm going to add that onion. It was like a small onion that I sliced, and I'm going to saute. So when it comes to cooking, when I'm busy, these 1 pan, 1 baking dish casseroles just works. So here I'm going to add some salt and just continue to saute that. And then what I'm going to do is push the onions to the side and add the ground beef. It goes right in. I'm also going to shake on the seasoning mix that I created, basically taco seasoning mix. And if you don't want taco seasoning flavor, season how you like. Okay, so I'm just going to speed things up, break it apart, and start cooking the ground beef. Eventually, I'm just going to mix everything in the pan and cook well. Once it has cooked through, I am going to shut off the heat and set it aside in a bowl. In the same pan, I'm going to add my potatoes. I just cut them into chunks this time. Typically, I like to just thinly slice them, but I just went for easy. I'm going to preheat my oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. And now I'm going to add the ground beef right on top. Essentially, I would like this to come out in layers, but if it all kind of like melds together and just becomes one, that's okay too, because it's the flavor that counts and it's really good. Okay, 1.5 cups of beef broth. I did not salt the potatoes because the beef broth has enough sodium. Okay, so just spread that out into a layer over the potatoes. And then remember that cream sauce? That's gonna go on top. And I'm just going to pour that right in the center, and then you just kind of spread that into a layer. I also want to mention that I sort of switched up or changed the potato to ground beef ratio because I wanted more potatoes. It kind of stretches the meal if you only have 1 pound of ground beef. So there's that. So just spread that out all over the top. It doesn't have to be perfect because once it sort of like bakes and cooks, it does kind of become one, but it tastes so good. Okay, now I'm going to add about 1.5 cups of low moisture shredded mozzarella cheese right on top. So I'm going to cover this with aluminum foil and I'm going to bake this covered for 1 hour and 15 minutes. So let me show you what this looks like when we took it out of the oven. First of all, you want to make sure the potatoes are cooked through. Potatoes, when they're chunky like that, take a while, so definitely a little over an hour. Okay, so I thought, ooh, this is going to be a nice little reveal, but let me show you what happened. Here we go. So you lift it, and everything stuck to the aluminum foil. So I'm going to scrape most of it off, and I'm going to have my husband put it right back under the broiler. Then after about like 3 minutes, it's nice and bubbly on top, and I'm burning my face. Okay, so you'll want to remove it out of the oven, And then it's ready to serve, or you can let it set, but we're hungry. So you probably could let this set for about 10 minutes, but I'm going to dig in. And again, is this like a stunner? Is this a showstopper like casserole? No. But guess what? It tastes so good. The potatoes are perfectly cooked through and creamy. The flavors go together so well. So there's that. I hope you give this a try. I hope you like it, and thanks for watching.